What could make a man abandon the shore and trust his future to something floating in the middle of a wilderness lake? The flashlight beam jerks across crashing black water as a floating cabin tilts beneath his boots. A German shepherd barks into the wind, then suddenly launches toward the edge. Rain needles his face. A snapped rope whips across the deck. Out beyond the storm, something moves where nothing should be. And the veteran realizes this night may change the course of everything he came here to build. Where are you watching from today? The last thing Cole Bennett sold was the porch swing. A young couple from 3 streets over hauled it away in the back of a trailer on a gray October afternoon. The chain rattled against the metal rail as they strapped it down. Cole stood in the driveway with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched until the trailer disappeared around the corner. The swing had belonged to his wife. For a long moment, he stared at the empty space on the porch where it had hung for nearly 20 years. Then he turned away. By sunset, there was almost nothing left inside the house. A folding chair, a coffee mug, a cardboard box filled with old photographs, and Kodiak. The German shepherd lay near the front door, watching every movement Cole made. The dog seemed to understand when something important was happening. He always had. Cole loaded the last box into his battered Ford pickup. The truck had more than 200,000 miles on it and sounded like it. Complained about everyone. The mountain air carried the scent of approaching snow. Montana winters were never patient. Neither was time. Inside the house, the rooms echoed now. Empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet that felt heavier than noise. 4 years earlier, the place had still been alive. His wife, Emily, humming while she cooked. A television playing in another room. The smell of coffee before dawn. The small things people never realize they're going to miss. Now only dust remained. Cole locked the front door for the final time. The key lingered in his hand. Then he slipped it into the mailbox and walked away. Kodiak climbed into the passenger seat without being asked. The dog circled twice before settling down. Cole started the truck. The engine growled. The town slowly disappeared behind them. He didn't look back. The road stretched west toward the mountains, toward the lake, toward the only piece of land he still owned. The drive took hours. Darkness arrived early. Rain tapped against the windshield. Kodiak slept most of the way. Cole didn't. He rarely slept much anymore. Some nights he managed 3 hours, some nights less. The doctors had given names to it. PD, hypervigilance, chronic insomnia. Words never seemed to help much. At a gas station outside Helena, he bought coffee he didn't need and stood beneath the fluorescent lights while the wind pushed dead leaves across the parking lot. The sudden clang of a metal dumpster lid snapping shut behind the building stopped him cold. His body reacted before his mind did. His shoulders tightened. His hand moved toward a weapon that wasn't there. For a split second, the gas station vanished. Heat, dust, a radio screaming through static, the distant crack of gunfire. Then the moment passed. Just wind, just Montana, just an old man holding a paper coffee cup. Kodiak pressed against his leg. The dog's warm shoulder grounded him. The shaking in his hand eased. "Yeah," Cole muttered quietly. "I'm good." Kodiak looked up at him as if he knew he wasn't. They reached the lake after midnight. Moonlight reflected across black water. Tall pines surrounded the shoreline like silent guards. The land his father had left him sat untouched at the edge of the wilderness. No neighbors, no lights, no traffic, nothing. Exactly what Cole thought he wanted. He parked near the shore. The engine died. Silence immediately rushed in. Real silence. The kind you only find far away from people. Kodiak jumped out first. His paws crunched across frost-covered grass. The dog began making slow circles around the clearing, checking scents, studying shadows. Working. Always working. Cole smiled faintly. Some habits never left either of them. He rolled out a sleeping bag in the truck bed. The temperature dropped fast. The stars burned bright above the lake. For the first time in years, there were no sirens. No neighbors. No televisions through thin walls. Only wind moving through pine branches. Cole eventually drifted into a shallow sleep. The crash came an hour later. Metal striking metal somewhere in the darkness. His eyes snapped open. His heart was already racing before he fully woke. For a moment, he couldn't tell where he was. Iraq, no Montana, the lake, the truck, Kodiak. The dog immediately placed his head against Cole's arm. Steady pressure, solid, present. The sound had only been an old fuel can knocked over by the wind, nothing more, but sleep never returned. Before sunrise, Cole built a small fire near the shoreline. The lake slowly emerged from darkness. Cold mist drifted across the water. The mountains reflected in the still surface. Beautiful, lonely, endless. He drank coffee and unfolded an old map that had belonged to his father. The paper was brittle with age. He had seen it many times growing up. But this morning something caught his attention. Near the center of the lake, a mark, small, hand-drawn, not part of the printed map, a circle, and beside it a symbol he didn't recognize. Cole frowned. His father had never mentioned it. Not once. Kodiak suddenly stopped sniffing the shoreline. The dog stared toward the center of the lake, ears forward, body perfectly still. Cole followed his gaze. Morning fog drifted over the water. The strange mark on the map rested beneath his thumb. For the first time since arriving, curiosity pushed aside the emptiness. Something was out there, and somehow both he and Kodiak seemed to know it. The lake had just given them their first question. Cole folded the map carefully and slid it back into its weathered leather sleeve. The symbol remained in his mind long after the paper disappeared. He had spent enough years in reconnaissance to trust a simple rule. When something doesn't make sense, don't ignore it. Observe first, move second. The morning sun climbed over the mountains, turning the mist above the water into glowing ribbons of gold. Kodiak trotted ahead along the shoreline. The German shepherd stopped every few yards to sniff the air before moving again. Always working, always scanning. Cole spent the next several days learning the land. The property stretched farther than he remembered. His father had brought him here as a boy, fishing, cutting firewood, sleeping beneath the stars. Back then, the lake had seemed endless. Now it looked different, older, like everything else. The shoreline quickly revealed a problem. Spring runoff had turned much of the ground into mud. Every step sank several inches. The lower sections were nearly impossible to walk across without slipping. One afternoon, Cole drove a wooden stake into the soil to mark a possible cabin site. The stake leaned sideways within minutes. The ground simply wasn't stable. He stared at it for a long time, then pulled it back out. A cabin on shore suddenly felt less certain. That evening, he spotted fresh tracks near his camp. Large, heavy, bare. The prints crossed less than 30 feet from where he slept. Kodiak followed the scent trail silently, ears raised. Cole crouched beside one of the tracks. The animal had been there only hours earlier. He glanced toward the dark tree line. Living alone in the wilderness meant accepting visitors. Some had 4 legs, some had 2. Neither category could be underestimated. By the end of the week, he had built a temporary shelter using a tarp, salvaged lumber, and pine poles. Nothing fancy, just enough to stay dry. The nights remained difficult. Sleep came in fragments, a few hours here, 20 minutes there, sometimes less. One night, the distant flash of lightning reflected off the lake. For a brief moment, the white light illuminated the tarp walls around him. His eyes opened instantly. His pulse surged. A flash, another. For half a second, he wasn't in Montana anymore. He was back in Iraq. Dust, smoke, the sudden white bloom of an explosion beyond a compound wall. Someone yelling through a headset. A medic sprinting toward a casualty collection point. Then the memory dissolved. The lake returned. The rain returned. Kodiak was already beside him. The dog rested his chin across Cole's knee. No barking, no whining, just presence. Steady, reliable. The way a good partner covered your blind side. Cole scratched behind the dog's ears. Still on watch, huh? Kodiak thumped his tail once. The next morning brought something unexpected. The dog became obsessed with a cluster of massive logs floating near the center of a narrow cove. For nearly an hour he stood at the shoreline staring at them. Then he barked, once, twice, then again. Cole followed his gaze. The logs were enormous. Storm-fallen timber that had drifted together over the years. They rose and fell gently with the movement of the water, floating, stable, naturally buoyant. An idea began forming before he even realized it. He launched an old aluminum rowboat he had found abandoned near the property. Line. Kodiak jumped in immediately. The dog sat at the bow like a seasoned sailor. Together they paddled toward the floating timber. The closer they got, the more Cole noticed. The logs weren't simply drifting. Many had become tangled together. Some had likely been floating there for years. They formed a rough platform. Not large, not permanent, but enough. Cole stepped carefully from the boat onto one of the thicker trunks. The log barely moved. His eyes narrowed. He shifted his weight, still stable. The idea grew larger, a platform anchored offshore, away from unstable ground, away from bears, away from flooding. His pulse quickened. For the first time since arriving, he felt something beyond purpose. That afternoon, he drove into the nearest town for supplies. The hardware store sat beside a gas station and a diner that looked unchanged since the 1970s. Inside, conversation stopped when the newcomer entered. Small towns worked that way. Everybody noticed strangers, especially older men with military posture and a German shepherd waiting in a pickup outside. The owner, a broad-shouldered man named Earl, helped load rope and fasteners onto the counter. "You building a cabin?" Earl asked. "Something like that." "On the north side of the lake?" Cole nodded. Earl smiled. "Good fishing up there." Cole hesitated, then decided there was no point hiding it. "I'm thinking about building out on the water." The smile vanished. "What? A floating platform?" Earl stared. The customer beside him laughed first. Another joined in. Within seconds, half the store was grinning. One man nearly dropped a box of nails. "A floating house?" Cole shrugged. "Something along those lines." The laughter grew louder. "That's the dumbest retirement plan I've heard in Montana." Even Earl chuckled. Not cruelly, just disbelief. Cole listened without arguing. He'd heard worse, much worse. Years ago, people had laughed at other impossible plans. Then, reality arrived. Reality didn't care what people believed. Outside, Kodiak sat beside the truck watching through the window. The dog tilted his head as Cole loaded the supplies. "You think it's crazy too?" Cole asked. Kodiak climbed into the truck without answering. The drive back felt different, not lighter, but clearer. By sunset, he was unloading timber near the shore. The lake reflected the orange sky. The mysterious symbol on his father's map lingered in the back of his mind. But another goal now stood in front of him. One board, one rope, one log at a time. The floating island would begin here. As darkness settled across the water, Cole carried the first beam toward the shoreline. Tomorrow he would build the foundation. And whether the town laughed or not, the lake was waiting. The next morning arrived cold and clear. Sunlight spilled across the water like molten copper. Cole was already awake, not because he had slept well, because he rarely did. At 4:17 a.m., he had opened his eyes and never closed them again. Old habits, old ghosts. He sat outside the tarp shelter with a cup of coffee, while Kodiak patrolled the shoreline. The dog moved in slow circles around camp, checking, observing, listening. The same way Cole used to work security around a temporary position overseas. One man, one dog, one perimeter. The mission felt strangely familiar. By sunrise, construction began. Cole dragged the first heavy timbers toward the cove where the floating logs rested. The work was exhausting. His shoulders burned. His knees protested every step. But each board that touched the water made the idea feel more real. Kodiak stayed close, sometimes watching, sometimes disappearing into the trees before returning minutes later, always checking, always reporting back. By the third day, the basic platform began taking shape. Nothing impressive, just a rough rectangle of salvaged lumber secured across the largest floating trunks. But it floated. That mattered. Cole climbed onto it carefully. The platform dipped slightly beneath his weight, then steadied. He took another step, then another. The lake rocked gently beneath him. For the first time in years, a small smile appeared on his face. Not because he had built something, because he had started. There was a difference. Many people talked about starting over. Very few actually did it. The following week became a blur of labor. Cole built from sunrise until dark, then planned improvements by lantern light. He created a sleeping area first, then a covered storage section for tools, then a raised observation corner facing the open water. He didn't consciously design it that way. Military instinct simply took over. Every position needed visibility. Every camp needed security. Every threat needed to be seen before it arrived. Kodiak quickly claimed the observation platform as his own. Each evening he sat there watching the lake, motionless, like a carved statue. Only his ears moved. One afternoon, Cole climbed onto the platform carrying a box of supplies. He stopped when he noticed the dog staring toward the western shoreline, not barking, not growling, watching. Cole followed his gaze. Nothing. Just trees. Still, he made a mental note. Years ago, he had learned something valuable. Trust trained eyes. Trust trained dogs. Never ignore either. A few days later, Sarah called. The connection was weak. The signal came and went with the wind. "Dad, are you sure about this?" Cole looked across the lake. The floating platform now stretched nearly 20 feet long. "I've been less sure about bigger things." Silence. Then a sigh. "You could come stay closer to us. I know. You don't have to do everything alone." Cole glanced toward Kodiak. The dog was asleep beside a pile of lumber. "No," he said softly. "Not everything." Sarah understood more than he realized. She didn't argue. They talked for another few minutes before the signal disappeared. The loneliness returned after the call ended. But somehow it felt lighter now. Less like an empty room, more like open space. Late that week, the weather changed. The mountains vanished behind dark clouds. Wind swept across the lake. The surface transformed from glass into rolling gray water. By sunset, waves slapped against the floating platform. The structure groaned. Cole secured additional ropes, checked anchors, checked them again. Then once more before dark, old habits. Trust, but verify. That night the storm arrived. Wind hammered the lake. Rain rattled against the roof overhead. The floating platform rose and fell in darkness. Cole lay awake listening. Every creak, every movement, every sound. Around midnight, exhaustion finally pulled him into sleep. Then came the barking. Violent, urgent, explosive. Kodiak. Cole's eyes opened instantly. The dog was racing across the platform, barking toward the eastern anchor line. Cole grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. Rain hit his face sideways. The beam cut through darkness. There. One of the primary anchor cables had snapped. The platform was already drifting. Slowly, silently. The lake was pulling it away. A few more minutes and the entire structure could have broken free. Cole moved immediately. No panic, just action. The same calm urgency that had carried him through worse nights decades earlier. Kodiak stayed beside him despite the wind. The dog barked each time the loose line disappeared beneath the waves, helping him track it. Together they secured a temporary replacement. Then another, then a third. For nearly 2 hours they fought the storm. By the time dawn arrived, both man and dog were soaked, exhausted, shivering, but still there. The floating island remained exactly where it belonged. Cole sat heavily on a crate. Kodiak dropped beside him. The lake slowly calmed. Sunlight broke through distant clouds. Neither moved for a while. Finally, Cole reached over and scratched behind the dog's ears. "You saved the whole thing." Kodiak leaned against his leg. The simple gesture said everything. A partnership. Not ownership, not companionship, partnership. Hours later, as the morning brightened, a distant engine echoed across the water. Cole stood. The sound didn't belong there. Not this early, not this far from town. A sleek black boat emerged from around the far shoreline. Expensive, fast, deliberate. It slowed as it approached the floating island. A man stood at the helm, tall, confident, studying every inch of what Cole had built. Neither man waved, neither smiled. The stranger remained there for nearly a minute, watching, evaluating. Then the boat turned and disappeared back toward open water. Cole continued staring long after it vanished. Kodiak stood beside him, hackles slightly raised. The dog had noticed too. Neither knew the man's name yet, but both recognized the feeling. Trouble had just entered the lake. For the next 3 days, Cole saw nothing more of the black boat. The lake returned to its usual rhythm. Wind across the water, loons calling at dawn, the steady sound of tools striking wood. Still, something had changed. Every morning before touching a hammer or saw, Cole stood on the observation platform with a pair of binoculars. Old habits. Years ago, before entering a new area, his unit had called it establishing pattern of life. Learn what belongs, notice what doesn't. The lake was becoming familiar now, which meant anything unusual stood out immediately. Kodiak seemed to feel it too. The dog spent longer periods watching the shoreline. Sometimes he would freeze in place, ears forward, staring into the trees. Then, after a minute, he would relax and move on. Cole trusted those pauses. Dogs noticed things people missed. The floating island continued growing. The sleeping shelter became a real cabin frame. Rain barrels appeared along one side of the platform. A small floating garden took shape using reclaimed containers filled with rich soil from the shoreline. Cole planted lettuce first, then beans, then peppers. Simple things, things that grew, things that proved life could move forward. One evening, he stood looking over the garden while the setting sun turned the lake gold. 4 months earlier, he had been staring at empty rooms and sold furniture. Now tiny green shoots pushed through dark soil. Not much, but enough. Enough to keep building. The following Saturday, he headed into town for supplies. Kodiak rode beside him. The dog always preferred the truck window down, regardless of temperature. Main Street looked exactly as it had the week before. The diner, the hardware store, the feed shop. Nothing changed quickly in places like this. Inside Earl's hardware store, conversations quieted again when Cole entered. Only this time people weren't laughing. They were curious. A few had already heard stories. The old veteran, the floating house, the dog, the lake. Small town news traveled faster than the internet. Earl shook his head while ringing up supplies. You're actually doing it. Looks that way. People are talking. They usually do. That earned a laugh. As Cole loaded lumber into the truck, a polished black SUV rolled into the parking lot. The vehicle looked expensive enough to buy half the buildings on the street. A tall man stepped out, well-dressed, clean boots, confident smile. The kind of smile that never quite reached the eyes. He walked directly toward Cole. I was hoping I'd run into you. Cole closed the truck bed. The man extended his hand. Logan Pierce. Cole shook it. The grip felt practiced, calculated. Cole Bennett. I know. That answer lingered in the air. Logan glanced toward Kodiak. The German shepherd remained sitting beside the truck, watching, silent. I've seen your project, Logan said. Word travels, so I've heard. Logan smiled again. The lake is beautiful, it is, and valuable. There it was, the real reason. Cole felt it immediately. Logan continued. My company owns property on the South Shore. We've been investing heavily in the area. Cole said nothing. Logan leaned against the truck casually. Tourism is growing. People want nature these days. They can already see it for free. That smile tightened slightly. I like direct people. Good. I'll be direct too. Logan pulled a business card from his pocket. If you're ever interested in selling, call me. Cole looked at the card, then at Logan. I'm not selling. You haven't heard an offer. I don't need to. The silence lasted several seconds. Then Logan nodded. Fair enough. He slipped his hands into his coat pockets. Still, I'd hate to see a man put years into something sitting on land worth far more than he realizes. Cole's expression never changed, but somewhere deep inside an old instinct stirred. The same instinct that used to warn him when conversations weren't really conversations. When questions were reconnaissance. When someone was gathering information. Logan tipped his head politely. Enjoy your afternoon, Mr. Bennett. Then he walked away. The SUV disappeared down Main Street. Kodiak watched until it vanished. Only then did the dog relax. The drive back felt longer. Cole replayed every word. Not the offer, the interest. Logan knew too much that bothered him. 3 weeks passed. Summer strengthened. The floating island flourished. The garden expanded. Fish traps appeared beneath the platform. A simple water collection system fed storage barrels. The island looked less like a project and more like a home. One afternoon, while checking tomato seedlings, Cole noticed Kodiak staring upward. The dog's ears twitched. A faint buzzing drifted across the water. Cole looked up, a drone, small, black, hovering high above the island, watching. The machine remained there for nearly 30 seconds, then turned and disappeared toward the southern shoreline. Kodiak barked furiously. Cole's jaw tightened. The next day it returned, and the day after that, always watching, always leaving. The feeling of being observed settled over the lake. Then came the footprints. The discovery happened just after sunrise. Cole stepped out of the cabin carrying a coffee mug. Halfway across the platform, he stopped. The mud was impossible to miss. A series of wet boot prints crossed the wooden deck. Fresh, human, not his, not from yesterday. Fresh. Kodiak was already standing over them. Low growl, rigid posture. The prints led across the platform, past the storage shed, past the garden, then vanished at the edge where a boat could have approached during the night. Cole slowly set down the coffee. His eyes followed every mark, every detail, every direction. His pulse remained calm, but the old Rika instincts were fully awake now. Someone had been on the island. Someone had walked through his home while he slept. And whoever it was had left before dawn. The lake suddenly felt much larger and much less empty. Cole spent the rest of that morning studying the footprints. The tracks crossed nearly half the platform before disappearing at the eastern edge. Size 11, maybe 12. Heavy boots. A man. Not a teenager, not a tourist. Someone who knew how to move quietly. Most people would have left deeper impressions in the mud. These prints were careful. Measured. Cole crouched beside them for several minutes. Kodiak remained close, nose working the scent trail. The dog's posture never relaxed. That bothered Cole more than the footprints themselves. Kodiak trusted very few strangers and feared even fewer. By noon, the sun had dried most of the evidence away. Only faint outlines remained. The lake looked peaceful again. But the feeling lingered. Someone had crossed a line. Someone had entered his home. That night, Cole slept even less than usual. Around midnight, he woke automatically and checked the shoreline through binoculars. At 2 in the morning, he checked again. At 4, he gave up entirely. The old military routines had returned. Observe, listen, wait. By sunrise, Kodiak was already pacing along the edge of the floating platform. Back and forth, back and forth. Something had his attention. For 3 consecutive days, the dog kept returning to the same section of water near the middle of the lake. The behavior wasn't normal. Kodiak wasn't chasing fish, wasn't playing, wasn't curious. He was focused. Each time he reached the spot, he would stare into the water, then look back at Cole, then stare again, like he was trying to explain something. On the 4th morning, the dog finally lost patience. Without warning, Kodiak jumped into the lake. Cole stood immediately. The German shepherd swam hard toward the location. When he arrived, he circled twice, then began pawing at the surface, splashing, diving his head beneath the water, returning to the surface, repeating it. again and again. Cole narrowed his eyes. "All right," he muttered. "What are you trying to show me?" An hour later, he was loading equipment into the rowboat. A rope, a pry bar, a flashlight sealed in waterproof housing. Kodiak jumped aboard before being invited. The lake was calm. The boat glided silently across the water. When they reached the location, the dog immediately stood, tail stiff, eyes locked downward. Cole leaned over the side. At first he saw nothing, just dark water. Then sunlight shifted. A straight line appeared beneath the surface. Not natural, not rock, not timber, something man-made. His pulse quickened. Years of reconnaissance had trained his eyes to notice shapes where others saw randomness. This shape belonged there for a reason. Cole anchored the boat, removed his jacket, took a deep breath, then slipped into the cold water. The shock hit instantly. Mountain lakes never warmed much. Even in summer, he surfaced once, adjusted the goggles, then dove again. The structure slowly emerged from the darkness. Wooden pilings, old, weathered, half buried in sediment, a dock, or what remained of one. Cole followed it farther down. His hand brushed something metallic. He stopped, turned, looked closer. Half hidden beneath decades of mud sat a rectangular steel box. His heartbeat accelerated. The object was roughly the size of a suitcase, too deliberate to be debris, too preserved to be accidental. He tugged at it, nothing. The mud held tight. He surfaced for air, then dove again, and again, and again. After nearly 20 minutes, the box finally shifted. A cloud of black sediment exploded upward. The steel scraped across submerged rock. The sound rang through the water, metal against stone, sharp, violent. Instantly, everything changed. The lake vanished. The cold vanished. The sunlight vanished. For a split second, Cole wasn't underwater anymore. He was standing in Iraq. A convoy rode, a radio crackling, a burst of static, then screaming, someone yelling coordinates, someone calling for a medic. The metallic screech became twisting armor, damaged vehicles, smoke, dust. The memory struck with brutal force. Cole surfaced violently, gasping. The boat rocked beside him. His breathing turned ragged. For several seconds, he couldn't separate the present from the past. The mountains looked unfamiliar. The sky looked wrong. His hands trembled. Then a wet nose touched his shoulder. Kodiak. The dog had swum beside him, watching, waiting, present, steady. Cole closed his eyes, focused on the sound of water, focused on the mountains, focused on the dog. Slowly, the memory released its grip. The lake returned. The year returned. Montana returned. He sat quietly in the boat afterward for almost an hour. Neither of them moved much. The steel box rested between them, covered in mud, silent, waiting. Finally, Cole reached down and wiped away decades of dirt. The hinges were rusted, but intact. The box had been built to survive. That alone made him curious. His father had spent years working around engineering projects after leaving the army. Cole remembered that much, but his father had never mentioned anything hidden beneath this lake. Not once. The afternoon sun drifted lower. Golden light spread across the water. Cole studied the box. Something about it felt familiar, intentional, important. The kind of thing people buried because they never intended strangers to find it. Kodiak sat beside him without taking his eyes off it, almost as if he understood. Back at the floating island, Cole carried the steel box into the cabin. He set it carefully on the table. Mud dripped onto the wooden floor. Outside, evening settled across the lake. Inside, silence filled the room. Cole found an old rag, cleaned more dirt away, then stopped. There, beneath years of corrosion, a faded set of initials, not military markings, not government markings, personal markings. The initials belonged to only one person, his father. Cole stared at them. Long enough for darkness to fully arrive outside. Whatever had been sleeping beneath the lake for decades had been waiting for him. And for the first time since arriving at the lake, Cole realized the strange symbol on the old map might never have been a mystery at all. It might have been a message. Rain arrived during the night, soft at first, then steady, Drops tapped against the cabin roof while the steel box sat in the center of the table between Cole and Kodiak. Neither had touched it for hours. Morning light finally pushed through the clouds. Cole poured coffee into a dented enamel mug and pulled the box closer. The hinges resisted. The lock had long ago surrendered to rust. A flathead screwdriver in 10 careful minutes finally broke the seal. The lid opened with a groan. A smell escaped first. Old paper, metal, time. Inside sat several waterproof folders wrapped in oilcloth, a leather-bound journal, a faded photograph, and a folded map much newer than the one his father had left him. Kodiak lifted his head immediately. Cole almost smiled. "You want to know too?" The dog thumped his tail once. Cole opened the journal. The handwriting hit him immediately. His father's, no doubt. Strong block letters, precise, disciplined. The kind of writing produced by engineers and soldiers. The first pages described construction surveys around the lake during the early 1970s. Nothing unusual. Then the entries changed. Cole kept reading. His coffee grew cold. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, the world slowly shifted. The project had a name: Veterans Floating Recovery Initiative. A pilot program. Small, experimental, almost forgotten. After Vietnam, several engineers, former military officers, and community leaders had proposed creating remote places where struggling veterans could reconnect with nature and rebuild their lives. Not hospitals, not institutions, places of purpose. Places built by veterans themselves. The lake had been one of the test sites. Cole stared at the page. His father had never spoken about any of this, not once. He turned another page, then another. Photographs appeared. Young men standing on floating platforms, gardens growing on rafts, small cabins anchored across the water. The images looked strangely familiar, not because he had seen them before, because they resembled exactly what he was building now. The realization sent a chill through him. Months earlier, he had believed the idea was entirely his. Now he was looking at proof that someone else had dreamed it 50 years ago. Someone very close to him. His father. The rain intensified. Wind pushed against the cabin walls. Cole kept reading. The final journal entries felt different, shorter, frustrated, funding problems. Political pressure, ownership disputes. Then suddenly the project disappeared from the record. No explanation, no conclusion, just silence. The journal ended. Cole sat back heavily. Kodiak walked over and rested his chin on his knee. For a long moment neither moved. Then something caught the dog's attention. Kodiak stood, nose working. He approached the empty steel box, sniffed once, twice, then pawed at the interior wall. A sharp metallic click echoed inside. Cole froze. The dog pawed again, another click. Cole leaned forward. The inner panel looked slightly thicker than the others. Hidden. Intentional. He grabbed a flashlight, examined the seam, there barely visible. A false compartment. His pulse quickened. The panel finally opened after several attempts. Inside rested a single waterproof envelope. Nothing else. No photographs, no journal entries, just one sealed package. Cole carefully removed it. The envelope remained remarkably preserved. Across the front, in his father's handwriting, were only 3 words: "If needed, later." Cole stared at them, then broke the seal. Several official-looking documents slid onto the table. Property records, survey maps, government approvals. Then one document stopped him cold. His eyes moved across the page twice. Then a third time. The wording didn't change. Exclusive surface rights authorization, the lake, the floating structures, the original project area, everything. The legal rights belonged to the initiative, and according to the final transferred document signed decades earlier, those rights had been assigned to one person, his father, then later inherited by his next surviving family member. Cole Bennett. The cabin suddenly felt very quiet. He understood immediately why someone like Logan Pierce would care. A resort needed control of the shoreline, control of the water, control of future development. These documents stood directly in the way. Kodiak gave a low growl. Cole looked up. The dog wasn't staring at the papers. He was staring out the window, toward the lake, toward the southern shore. Cole followed his gaze. Far away, nearly hidden by rain and distance, sat a black boat, motionless, watching. The same boat, the same man, Logan Pierce. Even from this distance, the timing felt wrong, too convenient, too interested. Cole slowly gathered the documents. Every instinct he possessed began firing at once. Recon instinct, survival instinct, the feeling that pieces were moving beneath the surface, just like the steel box had been hidden beneath the lake. Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. The floating island rocked gently beneath the storm. Inside the cabin, Cole placed the papers back into the envelope. For the first time since arriving, he understood something important. This was never only about building a home. Someone had left him a responsibility, and someone else wanted it badly. Across the water, the black boat finally turned. Its engine came to life. Slowly, it disappeared into the rain, but the feeling remained. The buried dream his father had protected for decades was no longer hidden. And sooner or later, Logan Pierce was going to learn that Cole had found it. The change came gradually, almost quietly. That was what made it dangerous. For nearly 2 weeks after finding the documents, nothing happened. No black boat, no drone, no strange visitors. The lake returned to its peaceful routine. Morning coffee, garden work, checking fish traps, repairing dock supports. Life moved forward. Yet Cole never fully relaxed. Years of military service had taught him another simple lesson. The absence of activity didn't always mean safety. Sometimes it meant preparation. Each night before bed, he checked every anchor point around the floating island. Each morning he scanned the shoreline through binoculars. Kodiak remained alert as well. The German shepherd frequently paused during patrols and stared toward the southern end of the lake, toward Logan's property, toward trouble. The floating island continued to grow. A greenhouse frame rose beside the garden. Additional fish pens expanded beneath the platform. The place no longer looked temporary. It looked permanent, like something intended to stay. One afternoon, Hank Murphy arrived in a battered aluminum fishing boat. The old fisherman tied off beside the floating island and climbed aboard. He spent nearly 10 minutes staring around before speaking. "Never thought I'd see anything like this." Cole laughed. Neither did most people. Hank nodded toward the greenhouse. "Town's talking. Good things or bad, depends who you ask." The old fisherman hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Pierce has been asking questions." Cole wasn't surprised. "What kind of questions?" "Land records, water access, property boundaries." Hank scratched his beard. "He seems mighty interested in your section of the lake." Cole glanced toward the distant shoreline. The feeling returned immediately. The feeling that invisible pieces were moving somewhere beyond sight. Hank eventually left before sunset, but his warning stayed behind. That night, clouds covered the moon. The lake became a sheet of black glass. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. Around midnight, Kodiak's growl woke Cole. Not barking, growling, low, steady, serious. Cole opened his eyes instantly. The dog stood beside the cabin doorway, staring into darkness, every muscle rigid. Cole grabbed a flashlight but didn't turn it on. Instead, he moved quietly, the same way he once approached unknown movement near an observation post. Slow, controlled, listening first. Outside, wind moved softly across the lake, nothing else. Then came the sound, a faint splash, not fish, not waves, a paddle. Someone was approaching without an engine. Cole's jaw tightened. He killed the cabin lantern immediately. Darkness swallowed the island. Kodiak remained silent, watching, waiting. The splash came again. Closer. Cole crouched behind a stack of lumber, his eyes adjusted. Finally, he saw it. A small boat. No lights, moving toward the fish pens. Not drifting, deliberate. Someone knew exactly where they were going. Cole remained still, observing, gathering information. The boat touched the platform. A shadow stepped out, then another. Both moved quickly, purposefully. They weren't exploring. They were working. Metal clanged softly. A rope snapped. One of the fish pen supports shifted. Cole understood immediately. Sabotage, the realization brought an unexpected calm. Not anger, not fear, focus. The same focus he had felt years ago whenever a situation suddenly became clear. The intruders never saw him. Kodiak did. The dog launched forward before either man realized they had been spotted. A furious bark exploded across the lake. One intruder stumbled backward. The other spun around. Go. Both men ran. Cole moved at the same time. The flashlight beam cut through darkness. The boat scraped away from the platform. One man nearly fell overboard, trying to escape. Within seconds, they disappeared into the night, but not before leaving damage behind. Several support lines hung loose. One fish enclosure had partially collapsed. Months of work floated dangerously close to failure. Kodiak paced the edge of the platform, barking toward the retreating boat, then suddenly yelped. A sharp sound. Wrong. Cole's stomach dropped. The dog limped away from the edge. Blood marked the wooden planks. A jagged piece of metal protruded from the damaged structure. During the chase, Kodiak had sliced deep into his front leg. Kodiak. The dog's ears lowered immediately. Cole knelt beside him. The cut wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious. Blood continued dripping onto the deck. The dog tried standing normally. Couldn't. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The intruders, the sabotage, Logan, none of it mattered. Only Kodiak. Cole carried him inside. Rain began falling outside. Soft at first, then harder. The cabin felt smaller than usual. The lantern cast long shadows across the walls. Kodiak lay quietly while Cole cleaned the wound. The dog never snapped, never resisted, just watched him, trusted him. The cut required stitches. Cole worked carefully. His hands remained steady, the same hands that once treated injuries under far worse conditions. When it was over, Kodiak finally rested his head on the blanket, exhausted. Cole sat beside him. The cabin fell silent. Outside, rain tapped against the roof. Inside, an older pain stirred. Not from Iraq, not from memory, from something much simpler. The realization that the one companion who had never left his side had been hurt protecting him. Hours later, long after the rain stopped, Cole stepped outside. The lake was dark again, empty, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. The attack had failed. The island still stood. Yet whoever came that night had sent a message, and Kodiak had paid the first price. Back inside, the dog shifted uneasily in his sleep. Cole sat beside him until dawn, watching, waiting, knowing this wasn't over, not even close. The next morning arrived under a gray sky. The lake looked calm, too calm, like it was pretending nothing had happened. Cole hadn't slept, not really. He spent most of the night sitting beside Kodiak's bed near the stove. Every time the dog shifted, Cole looked up. Every time Kodiak groaned softly in his sleep, Cole checked the bandage again. Years ago, during deployments, he'd learned to sleep lightly, to wake at the smallest sound. Those habits had never left. Now they had a different purpose, protecting the only partner he had left. Outside, the floating island waited. Work needed to be done. Repairs needed to be made. The damaged fish enclosure hung partially submerged near the eastern edge. Several support beams remained twisted from the sabotage. Yet, for the first time since arriving at the lake, Cole ignored the work. Kodiak came first. The German shepherd refused breakfast. That worried him more than the injury itself. Kodiak never refused food, not even during storms, not even during long days of construction. But now the bowl sat untouched. The dog merely lowered his head and closed his eyes. Cole carried the food away without saying anything. The silence inside the cabin felt heavier than usual. Rain tapped softly against the roof. The greenhouse plastic rustled outside. Hours passed. By afternoon, the fever started. Kodiak's nose felt warm. His breathing changed. Cole immediately knew. Infection. The nearest veterinarian was over an hour away. The roads around the lake were rough. The weather was getting worse. He gathered supplies, cleaned the wound again, applied fresh medication, then waited. Waiting was always the hardest part. You couldn't fight waiting. You couldn't outwork it. You simply endured it. That night, a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the mountains. The sound hit Cole unexpectedly. His body stiffened. Not because of the storm, because for one brief second it sounded like incoming artillery. His eyes closed. The cabin disappeared. Heat returned. Dust returned. The radio chatter returned. A convoy crossing a stretch of road outside Fallujah. Vehicles spread across the route. Someone laughing over the headset moments before everything changed. The memory slammed into him with brutal clarity. Cole opened his eyes immediately. Back in Montana, back on the island, back beside Kodiak, the dog was staring at him, watching. The same way he always did when the memories surfaced. As if he knew. Maybe he did. Cole reached down and rested a hand against the dog's neck. The fur felt warm, too warm. "You don't get to leave," he said quietly. Kodiak blinked slowly. Outside, rain intensified. For a long time, neither moved. The words slipped out before Cole realized he was speaking. "I already lost enough people." His voice sounded older than he remembered. The lantern flickered softly. The storm continued. And for the first time in the entire journey, Cole began talking, not to himself, not to the empty cabin, to Kodiak, like a partner, like a fellow soldier. He told him about Marcus, a young medic from Texas, always smiling, always carrying extra candy in his pack, the kind of man everyone trusted. One afternoon, Marcus hadn't come home. The convoy had returned without him. Cole had spent years wondering whether he could have changed something, done something differently, taken a different route, spoken a different warning. The guilt never completely disappeared. It simply learned how to hide. Kodiak listened quietly. His eyes never left Cole. Outside, lightning flashed across the lake. For a moment, the entire cabin glowed white. Then darkness returned. Cole sat there until dawn, talking, remembering, watching over the dog. By morning, Kodiak finally drank a little water. Not much, but enough. Hope returned, tiny, fragile, still hope. The following day brought sunlight. The lake sparkled again. Birds returned to the shoreline. The world seemed eager to move forward. Kodiak even managed a short walk across the platform. Slow, careful, but walking. Cole smiled for the first time in days. Maybe the worst had passed. Maybe, that evening, Sarah called. The signal crackled. "How's Kodiak?" "Better, good." "You worried about him or me?" "Both." Cole laughed softly. A rare sound. Sarah heard it, and laughed too. The call ended shortly after sunset. For a few minutes, everything felt normal, peaceful. The kind of peace people spend their entire lives chasing. Then night arrived. The moon remained hidden behind clouds. Wind moved gently across the water. Cole fell asleep in the chair beside Kodiak's bed. Exhaustion finally won. Hours later, something woke him. Not barking, not thunder. Silence. Complete silence. His eyes opened. The cabin felt wrong immediately. Too empty. Too still. Cole sat upright. The blanket beside the stove was empty. Kodiak was gone. The front door stood slightly open. Cold air drifted inside. For one frozen second, Cole simply stared. His mind refused to process what he was seeing. Then he was moving. Outside, flashlight, boots, the platform, nothing. No dog, no sound. Only darkness stretching across the lake. Kodiak, the name echoed across the water. No answer. Cole's pulse accelerated. He searched the entire island, every walkway, every corner, every section of shoreline. Nothing. The flashlight beam swept across the lake again and again. Still nothing. Far above, clouds covered the stars. The darkness seemed endless. Then a new sound reached him. Distant, faint, almost lost beneath the wind. One bark, only one, coming from somewhere across the lake. Then silence returned, and this time it felt terrifying. "Kodiak!" Cole's voice echoed across the black water. The mountains threw the sound back at him. No answer came. Only wind, only darkness, only the lake. He stood frozen for several seconds, listening with every instinct he possessed. Years ago, in Iraq, there had been moments when entire patrols stopped moving. Moments when everyone listened. Not because they heard something, because they didn't. The absence of sound could be just as dangerous. Cole swept the flashlight across the shoreline again. Nothing. Then he heard it. A faint bark. Far away. Almost swallowed by the wind. One bark. Then silence. But it was enough. Kodiak was alive. Cole didn't waste another second. Within minutes, he had loaded emergency supplies into the rowboat. Flashlight, medical kit, rain gear, tow rope. The weather forecast had warned of an incoming storm system. Now dark clouds were already gathering beyond the western ridgeline. The lake wouldn't stay calm for long. He pushed away from the floating island. The boat slid into darkness. Every paddle stroke carried him farther from safety. The cold wind strengthened steadily. Small waves slapped against the hull. Cole followed the direction of the bark as best he could. His flashlight swept across rocky outcroppings and narrow stretches of shoreline. Nothing. Again, nothing. The storm arrived faster than expected. Rain began as scattered drops, then became a curtain. Visibility collapsed. The mountains vanished completely. Lightning flashed somewhere beyond the ridge. For a moment, the entire lake turned silver. Then darkness swallowed everything again. Cole kept moving. Hour after hour, searching, calling, listening. Kodiak. The wind stole most of his voice. Another flash of lightning illuminated a cluster of rocks ahead. This time he saw movement, a shape, small, motionless. His heart slammed against his ribs. Cole rowed harder. The boat scraped against stone. He jumped into knee-deep water and climbed the rocks. There, Kodiak. The German shepherd stood trapped on a narrow shelf above the lake. One section of loose rock had collapsed behind him. The injured leg trembled beneath his weight. His fur was soaked. His eyes reflected the flashlight. For one terrifying second, neither moved. Then Kodiak limped forward. Cole dropped to one knee. The dog pressed against him immediately. Not dramatic, not frantic, just relief. The kind shared between old partners. Cole buried one hand into the thick fur around his neck. For a long moment he simply sat there. Rain hammered the rocks. Thunder rolled overhead. Neither cared. "You stubborn idiot." Kodiak licked his hand. Cole laughed despite everything. The sound surprised even him. Then something caught his attention. A light. Not lightning. A light, steady, artificial. Farther inland. Cole narrowed his eyes. The glow came from behind a line of trees near the base of a cliff. No roads existed here, no cabins either. The location made no sense. Immediately his instincts shifted. Observe, assess, move carefully. He secured Kodiak beside the boat, beneath a rocky overhang. The dog wanted to follow. Cole shook his head. "Stay." Reluctantly, Kodiak obeyed. Cole moved uphill through rain-soaked brush. Every step felt familiar. The old habits returned automatically. Stay below ridgelines. Avoid open ground. Watch silhouettes. Listen before moving. By the time he reached the trees, the rain had become a downpour. The source of the light finally appeared. A storage shed. Large, metal, recently constructed. Hidden from the lake. Cole crouched behind fallen timber and watched. Several boats sat nearby. Fuel containers, construction equipment, stacks of lumber, equipment worth thousands of dollars. Far too much for a hunting camp. Then he recognized the logo painted on one crate. Pierce Development Group, Logan. The realization settled heavily. The hidden facility wasn't illegal proof of anything by itself, but it revealed something important. Logan had been operating around the lake far more aggressively than anyone realized. Much of the equipment looked designed for shoreline construction, dock expansion, land clearing, future development. The scale shocked him. Cole remained there for nearly 20 minutes, watching, studying, memorizing details. Then a sudden crack of thunder exploded overhead. The storm intensified instantly. Branches bent violently. The lake below disappeared beneath sheets of rain. Time to leave. The return trip proved brutal. Waves battered the rowboat. Wind pushed sideways. Several times water splashed over the edge. Kodiak stayed low and silent throughout the crossing. The dog seemed to understand the danger. By the time they reached the floating island, both were exhausted. Cole secured every anchor line twice, then 3 times. The sky looked wrong. Too dark, too heavy, too organized. A veteran learns to recognize approaching trouble. The storm building over the mountains wasn't an ordinary storm. It was becoming something much worse. The following morning confirmed it. Sheriff Tom called over the radio frequency local boaters sometimes used. Winter fronts moving early. How bad? A pause then. Worst forecast I've seen in years. Cole looked toward the western horizon. The clouds stretched from one end of the mountains to the other. Massive, dark, relentless. The floating island rocked beneath his boots. Nearby, Kodiak sat beside the greenhouse, watching the sky, the same way he watched strangers, the same way he watched danger. Cole felt it too. The attack had failed. Kodiak was home. The hidden facility had been discovered. But none of those problems mattered right now, because something larger was coming. Much larger. And for the first time since he started building the island, Cole wasn't sure if anything he had built would survive what was headed toward the lake. The storm arrived 2 days later. Not with thunder, not with drama. It arrived with silence. A strange stillness settled over the lake that morning. The birds disappeared. The water barely moved. Even the wind seemed to be holding its breath. Cole noticed it immediately. Years earlier, before major sandstorms crossed certain parts of Iraq, the world often became quiet first. Nature knew before people did. Kodiak knew too. The German shepherd remained unusually close all day. He followed Cole from one end of the island to the other, watching, waiting. The dog rarely behaved that way unless something felt wrong. By noon, the western sky had turned dark gray. By 3 o'clock, it looked almost black. The mountains vanished completely. Coles spent every remaining hour preparing. Anchor lines were doubled, then tripled. Storage barrels were secured. The greenhouse was reinforced with additional supports. Every loose tool was stored. Every board was tied down. Every weakness he could find was strengthened. Yet it still didn't feel like enough. The floating island had grown far beyond the simple platform he first built. Now it carried gardens, fish pens, rainwater systems, the greenhouse. Months of work, months of purpose, months of healing. Everything sat exposed on open water. At sunset, Sheriff Tom's voice crackled across the radio. "You ready over there?" Cole looked toward the dark horizon. "No," Tom laughed softly. "That's probably the smartest answer anyone's given me all day." The radio fell silent again. Night arrived early. The first gust hit shortly after dark. The floating island lurched sideways. The cabin walls groaned. Kodiak instantly stood. Cole was already pulling on his rain gear. Outside, the lake had transformed. Whitecaps stretched across the water. Wind screamed between the mountains. The temperature dropped rapidly. A second gust slammed into the island. Stronger, much stronger. The structure shifted beneath his feet. Anchor lines strained. The sound reminded him of ships fighting rough seas. Every rope hummed under tension. Then the rain arrived. Sheets of it, horizontal, violent. The beam from his flashlight barely penetrated 20 feet. The world beyond that simply vanished. For hours, Cole moved nonstop, checking anchors, securing panels, removing damaged sections before they could tear loose. Every task seemed to create 2 more. Every repair revealed another problem. The storm wasn't attacking one structure. It was attacking everything. Around midnight, one of the primary greenhouse supports failed. The crack echoed above the wind. Cole spun immediately. The entire structure leaned dangerously toward the water. If it collapsed, months of food production would disappear with it. He ran. Kodiak followed despite the injured leg. Together they fought the storm. Cole dragged support beams into position. The dog remained nearby, refusing to leave. Rain streamed from his coat. The wind nearly knocked him sideways several times. Finally, the greenhouse stabilized. For now. Cole barely had time to breathe. A loud snap exploded somewhere behind him. Another anchor line. Gone. The floating island shifted several feet. The lake surged beneath the platform. Water splashed across the deck. Cole grabbed new rope and ran toward the western side. The darkness felt endless. The storm felt alive. Everywhere he turned, something needed saving. Everywhere he looked, the lake tried to take back what he had built. Hours passed. One crisis after another. The fish pens nearly broke free. The observation platform partially collapsed. A storage rack disappeared entirely into the darkness. Then came the moment he would remember for the rest of his life. It happened around 3 in the morning. Cole was crossing the main walkway, carrying a replacement support beam. Lightning flashed. For one brief second, the entire island became visible. And in that instant, Kodiak lunged. The dog slammed into his leg, hard. Cole stumbled sideways. The support beam fell from his hands. A fraction of a second later, a massive pine tree crashed onto the exact section of deck where he had been standing. The impact shook the entire island. Wood exploded. Boards shattered. The sound disappeared beneath the roar of the storm. For several seconds, Cole simply stared, frozen. The tree trunk was nearly 3 feet thick. One step slower, 1 second later, and it would have crushed him. Kodiak stood beside him, panting, soaked, shaking. The dog pressed against his leg, making sure he was still there. Cole dropped to one knee, wrapped both arms around the shepherd's neck. For a moment, the storm disappeared. The lake disappeared. Everything disappeared except gratitude, raw, overwhelming. Then another gust hit. Reality returned. The fight wasn't over. By dawn, exhaustion had replaced fear. Cole moved mechanically now. One task, then another, then another. The eastern horizon slowly brightened. Gray replaced black. The wind weakened. The rain softened. The storm finally began moving east. The longest night of the year was ending. Cole stood near the center of the island, breathing heavily. Kodiak sat beside him, both covered in mud, both exhausted. Slowly, daylight revealed the damage. The sight felt like a punch to the chest. The observation platform was gone. One fish enclosure had disappeared entirely. Sections of the greenhouse had collapsed. Several gardens had been destroyed. The fallen tree had crushed part of the main walkway. Months of work lay scattered across the lake. Cole stared silently. The floating island remained afloat. But barely. The storm had left something behind. Proof. Proof that nature didn't care about plans. Didn't care about effort. Didn't care about dreams. And standing there among the wreckage, watching broken pieces drift away across the water, Cole realized something that frightened him more than the storm itself. He wasn't sure he had enough left in him to build it all again. For 3 days, almost nothing happened. The lake remained gray. The sky remained low. The floating island sat wounded in the middle of the water. Cole repaired only what was absolutely necessary. A broken support beam, a damaged anchor line, part of the walkway, nothing more. The energy that had carried him through months of construction seemed gone. Everywhere he looked, he saw loss. The greenhouse, the observation platform, the gardens, the fish pens. Every project carried memories of hours spent building beside Kodiak. Now much of it was scattered across the lake. The dog followed him quietly. His injured leg was finally healing. But even Kodiak seemed to understand something was different. The island felt empty. One evening, Cole sat alone near the edge of the platform, watching sunset colors fade behind the mountains. A piece of driftwood floated past. Then another. The lake was slowly returning fragments of his work. He barely noticed. Years ago, after returning from Iraq, there had been mornings exactly like this. Days when getting out of bed felt harder than carrying a rucksack through desert heat. Days when purpose disappeared. Days when he simply existed. The same feeling had returned. Only now it floated around him in the form of broken lumber and damaged dreams. Kodiak eventually walked over and dropped something into his lap. A work glove. one of Cole's. The dog stared at him, waiting. Cole almost laughed. Almost. You don't quit, do you? Kodiak's tail thumped once. The next morning brought visitors. The first boat arrived shortly after sunrise. Hank Murphy stepped out carrying lumber. Not much, just enough for repairs. I heard about the storm. Cole looked surprised. Hank shrugged. Whole county heard about the storm. Before Cole could answer, another boat appeared. Then another. Then another. By noon, half a dozen people stood on the floating island. People who had never visited before. People who had only heard stories. Some brought tools. Others brought materials. One woman brought greenhouse panels. Another brought seeds. Nobody asked for payment. Nobody asked for ownership. They simply started helping. Cole watched in disbelief. The same town that once laughed at the idea. The same people who called it impossible. Now they were rebuilding it. Word had spread farther than he realized. Local news stations had run stories about the floating island surviving the storm. Photographs circulated online. The veteran, the dog, the floating farm, the hidden dream. People became curious, then inspired. A week later, a reporter arrived. Then another. The story spread beyond the county, beyond Montana. One morning, Cole stepped outside and found two retired Marines helping repair the greenhouse. Neither lived nearby. One had driven 6 hours. The other nearly 8. They shook his hand, then immediately got to work. No speeches, no introductions, just work. The way veterans often communicated best. More help arrived. Then even more. The floating island began growing again. Stronger this time. Smarter. Lessons from the storm shaped every repair. New supports. Stronger anchors. Better foundations. What had once been experimental now became resilient. The transformation happened so quickly it felt unreal. Meanwhile, Sheriff Tom continued investigating the sabotage. Several anonymous tips reached his office after news coverage increased. Then came the breakthrough. A former employee of Logan Pierce contacted authorities. Photographs surfaced, maintenance records surfaced, boat logs surfaced. Enough evidence to connect Logan's operation to multiple acts of vandalism around the lake. Not just Cole's Island, other properties too. The investigation moved fast after that. Logan's confidence disappeared almost overnight. Construction permits were frozen. Financial partners withdrew. Investors vanished. The development project that had seemed unstoppable suddenly began collapsing. One afternoon, Logan himself arrived at the floating island. For the first time, he looked tired, older, smaller. The expensive confidence was gone. He stood at the end of the dock while Kodiak watched carefully from nearby. Neither man spoke for several moments. Finally, Logan nodded toward the island. "You won." Cole looked around. Workers repaired structures. Gardens grew again. Laughter drifted across the water. "No," Cole said quietly. "I didn't." Logan followed his gaze. For the first time, he seemed to understand. This place had become something larger than either of them. He left without another word. Cole never saw him again. Months passed. Summer returned. The floating island flourished. Vegetables filled the gardens. The greenhouse produced more food than ever. The fish pens recovered. Everything looked stronger, healthier, alive. Then came the offer. A corporation approached through lawyers. The number contained more money than Cole had ever imagined. Millions. Enough to retire comfortably. Enough to buy almost anything. The proposal arrived in a thick envelope. Cole read it once, then set it aside. That evening, he sat beside the water with Kodiak. The dog rested his head across Cole's boot. The lake reflected the sunset. Peaceful, quiet. A year ago, he had arrived with almost nothing. Now he possessed something money couldn't replace. Purpose. The next morning, he mailed a single-page response. No negotiation, no discussion, no counteroffer. Just one sentence, not for sale. The decision stunned everyone. Reporters, lawyers, developers, even Sarah. But for Cole, the answer had never been difficult. Because the island was never the goal. The island was only the beginning. And somewhere deep inside, He finally knew what his father had been trying to build all those years ago. Not floating structures, not gardens, not docks. Something far more valuable. A place where people could heal. A place where no one had to carry the weight alone. And for the first time since Emily died, Cole found himself looking forward to the future. Not backward, forward, toward whatever came next. A year later, the lake looked completely different. The floating island no longer resembled the rough platform Cole Bennett had pieced together from driftwood and stubborn determination. It had become a small world of its own. Morning sunlight reflected from greenhouse windows. Rows of vegetables stretched across raised floating beds. Tomatoes climbed trellises. Peppers swayed gently in the breeze. Fish moved beneath the water in carefully built enclosures. Rainwater systems connected one structure to another. Wooden walkways linked every section of the island together. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a place. The island floated quietly in the center of the lake, as if it had always belonged there. Cole stood on the main dock holding a coffee mug. Kodiak sat beside him. The shepherd's muzzle had begun turning gray. A little more each month. Age was finding them both. Neither complained. The morning air carried the scent of pine and fresh earth. A canoe approached from the eastern shore. Then another. Then another. Visitors had become common. Not tourists, not sightseers. Veterans. Some arrived alone, some arrived with spouses. Some arrived carrying burdens they never talked about. Cole recognized the signs immediately. The sleepless eyes, the constant scanning, the habit of sitting where they could see every entrance. The silence. He never asked questions. He never pushed. He simply handed them a fishing rod, or a hammer, or a packet of seeds. Work first, conversation later, sometimes much later. That approach seemed to help. The island slowly became something nobody had planned. A place where people breathed easier. A place where nobody had to explain why loud noises still mattered. A place where nobody laughed when someone checked a doorway twice. A place where old soldiers could simply exist. One afternoon, a former Marine named Ben spent 3 hours rebuilding a section of fencing. He barely spoke. When he finally finished, he stood back and stared at his work, then smiled. It was the first smile anyone had seen from him all day. Cole noticed, so did Kodiak. The dog walked over and sat beside him. No tricks, no commands, just company. Ben scratched behind the shepherd's ears. For a moment, something heavy seemed to lift from his shoulders. Moments like that became common. The island was doing exactly what Cole's father had hoped it would do decades earlier. The old dream had finally survived long enough to become real. Late one afternoon, a pickup truck appeared at the shore. Cole looked up from repairing a plant at her box. His breath caught slightly. Sarah. His daughter stepped out first. Then 2 small children climbed from the back seat. Cole froze. He hadn't seen his grandchildren in nearly a year. The younger one spotted him first. "Grandpa!" The little boy sprinted toward the dock. Cole barely had time to stand before a pair of small arms wrapped around his waist. The second child arrived moments later, laughing, talking, pointing at everything. Questions poured out faster than answers. Sarah smiled from behind them. The expression reminded him of her mother. For a moment, the years disappeared. The children spent the afternoon exploring. They fed fish, collected eggs, helped water vegetables. Kodiak followed them everywhere. Patient, protective. The old shepherd moved slower now, but his instincts never faded. Whenever the children approached the water, Kodiak quietly positioned himself nearby, watching, guarding, working, exactly as he always had. As evening approached, everyone gathered near the central fire pit. The mountains glowed orange beneath the setting sun. The lake reflected the colors perfectly. One by one, the sounds of conversation softened. The children sat beside Kodiak. The shepherd rested his head across the little boy's lap, completely content. Cole looked around the island, the gardens, the cabins, the greenhouse, the docks. the veterans sharing stories nearby. The family gathered together, the life that now existed here. A year earlier, he had arrived carrying grief, exhaustion, and a map he barely understood. Now he understood every line, every symbol, every reason his father had hidden those documents. This place had never been about survival. It had always been about healing. As darkness settled over the lake, Cole quietly stood and walked toward a small wooden wall near the edge of the island. Few visitors noticed it at first. There were no large signs, no speeches, no ceremony, just names. A simple memorial built from reclaimed wood. Names of friends, brothers, people who never made it home, people whose stories deserved remembering. Cole reached beneath his shirt. His fingers closed around something he had worn for years, military identification tags. The metal felt cool in his hand. For a long moment, he stood silently. Wind moved across the water. The lake remained calm. Behind him, laughter drifted from the fire. Life continued. Slowly, Cole removed the chain from around his neck. He looked at it one final time, then carefully hung it on the memorial wall. Not as a goodbye, as a release, a weight carried long enough. When he turned around, Kodiak was waiting. The shepherd had crossed the island without making a sound. As usual, Cole smiled. Ready? Kodiak stood. The old dog fell into step beside him. Together they walked back toward the lights of the floating home. Toward family, toward friends, toward peace. The lake shimmered beneath the stars. The island floated quietly in the darkness. And for the first time in many years, Cole Bennett no longer felt like he was carrying the journey alone. This time, nobody had been left behind. If you believe loyalty can change a life, leave a simple 1 in the comments. And if you've ever had a dog, a friend, or a family member who stood by you during your hardest days, leave a 0 below so we can honor them together. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more powerful stories of veterans, faithful dogs, courage, loss, and second chances waiting for you right here. And until the next story, take care of the people who stay beside you when life gets hard, because sometimes they're the reason we find our way home.